Jake Morrison had always loved the quiet of his mountain cabin. The old wooden structure sat deep in the Colorado wilderness where cell towers could not reach, and the nearest neighbor lived 20 miles away. He came here every few months to escape the chaos of city life and clear his head. On this cold October morning, Jake noticed something strange as he approached his cabin after a supply run to town. Fresh footprints in the mud led to his back door, but they were not human. The prints were longer and narrower, with what looked like 4 toes instead of 5. Jake pulled out his hunting rifle and moved carefully around the cabin, checking for signs of a break-in. The back door hung slightly open, and he was certain he had locked it before, leaving his heart pounded as he stepped inside. The main room looked normal, but Jake sensed someone watching him. He moved toward the kitchen when he heard a soft sound from the bedroom, a whimper, like a wounded animal trying to stay quiet. Jake pushed open the bedroom door slowly, the rifle ready in his hands. What he saw made him freeze in shock. Huddled in the corner behind his bed was a woman, but she was unlike any human he had ever seen. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. Her hair was silver white and fell in waves past her shoulders. Her eyes were large and violet-colored, filled with terror as she stared at him. She wore strange clothing that looked like it was made from some kind of metallic fabric. The material shimmered as she trembled. The woman was clearly injured. Blood seeped through tears in her clothing, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. Jake lowered his rifle slowly and held up his free hand to show he meant no harm. The woman pressed herself further into the corner and made a sound that might have been words in a language he did not understand. He tried to speak in the calmest voice he could manage. "Hey, it's okay. I am not going to hurt you." The woman shook her head frantically and tried to make herself smaller. Jake realized she probably could not understand him any more than he could understand her, but his tone seemed to register. She stopped trying to hide and just watched him with those huge, frightened eyes. Jake set his rifle against the wall and took a step back to give her more space. He pointed to himself and said his name slowly. "Jake. Jake Morrison." The woman tilted her head slightly as if processing this information. She touched her chest and made a series of musical sounds that Jake guessed was her name. He tried to repeat it, but failed badly. The woman almost seemed to smile for just a moment before the fear returned. Jake noticed she was shivering badly. The cabin was cold, and her injuries were clearly serious. He needed to help her, but he also needed to figure out what she was and where she came from. Moving very slowly, Jake went to his closet and pulled out a thick blanket. He held it up to show her what it was, then placed it on the floor between them and stepped back. The woman looked at the blanket, then at Jake, then back at the blanket. After a long moment, she reached out and pulled it around herself. That small act of trust gave Jake hope. He went to the kitchen and filled a bowl with warm water, then grabbed his first aid kit. The woman watched every move he made as he returned to the bedroom. Jake set the supplies on the floor and sat down several feet away from her. He pointed to her injured arm, then to the first aid kit. The woman seemed to understand, but she was still afraid. For the next hour, Jake worked slowly to gain her trust. He showed her each item from the first aid kit before using it. He cleaned her wounds as gently as possible while she bit back cries of pain. Her blood was red like human blood, but it seemed to glow slightly with the same soft light as her skin. As he worked, Jake began to piece together what might have happened. The woman had clearly been in some kind of accident or fight. Her injuries suggested she had fallen from a great height or been thrown against something hard. There were burn marks on her clothing that looked like they came from energy weapons, not anything humans used. When Jake finished treating her wounds, the woman seemed less afraid. She even let him help her drink some water and eat a little soup. Though she was still wary, she no longer flinched every time he moved. As night fell, Jake built up the fire in the main room and made a bed for her on the couch. The woman followed him but stayed close to the walls, ready to run if needed. Jake settled into his chair across the room and tried to think about what to do next. He could not call anyone even if he wanted. The phones did not work up here, and driving to town would mean leaving her alone, which seemed wrong somehow. She was hurt and scared, and clearly not from Earth. Jake thought about the stories he had read about alien contact. The government would want to study her, or worse, the military would see her as a threat. People would be afraid of what they did not understand. But looking at this frightened, injured woman, Jake could not see any threat. She was just someone who needed help over the Next few days, Jake and the woman developed a routine of sorts. He would cook simple meals and she would eat what she could. He changed her bandages and made sure she was warm and comfortable. She began to relax around him, though she was still ready to run if needed. The woman was clearly intelligent. She watched how Jake used his tools and appliances and seemed to understand their purpose quickly. She tried to help with small tasks, though her injured arm limited what she could do. Jake started teaching her English words. He would point to objects and say their names slowly. She was a fast learner and soon could say simple words like water, food, warm, cold. She taught him words from her language too, though Jake struggled with the musical sounds. On the fourth day, the woman seemed agitated. She kept looking out the windows and making worried sounds. Jake followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. However, that evening he heard a distant humming sound, unlike anything from Earth. The woman became terrified. She grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away from the windows. Her eyes were wide with panic and she spoke rapidly in her own language. Jake understood enough of her gestures to realize something was coming. Something she was very afraid of. The humming grew louder, and lights appeared in the sky. Strange angular shapes that moved too smoothly to be human aircraft. They circled the area for hours while Jake and the woman hid in the basement. The woman clung to Jake's arm and whispered what sounded like prayers. Finally, the lights moved away and the humming faded. The woman sagged with relief, but Jake could tell this was not over. Whoever was looking for her would be back over the following weeks. Jake learned more about his unexpected guest. Her name was something like Lyra, though that was the closest he could come to pronouncing it. She was from a ship that had crashed in the mountains. Her people were explorers, not conquerors, but they had been attacked by another alien race while studying Earth. Lyra had escaped the battle but was badly hurt when her small craft crashed. She had been hiding for days before finding Jake's cabin, starving and afraid. Her own people thought she was dead and the hostile aliens were still hunting for survivors. Jake realized he had a choice to make. He could try to contact the authorities and let them handle the situation. But he had seen how terrified Lyra was of being discovered by the wrong people. She trusted him and he was not about to betray that trust. Instead, Jake decided to help her find her people if any had survived. He knew the mountains better than anyone, and if there were crash sites out there, he could find them. It would be dangerous, but Jake could not abandon someone who had nowhere else to turn. Lyra seemed to understand what he was offering. When he showed her maps of the area and mimed searching, she nodded eagerly. For the first time since he found her, she looked hopeful instead of just scared. Jake began preparations for their search. He gathered supplies and equipment while Lyra recovered her strength. Her people healed faster than humans, and her injuries were improving quickly. She was also learning English at an amazing rate and could now hold basic conversations as they prepared to leave the safety of the cabin. Jake realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. He had found a frightened alien hiding in his home, and somehow she had become someone he cared about protecting. The universe was bigger and more dangerous than he had imagined, but it was also full of people just trying to survive. Jake looked at Lyra as she carefully packed the few belongings she had. She caught him watching and gave him a small smile that lit up her whole face. In that moment, Jake knew he had made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The mountains held secrets and dangers, but they also offered hope. Somewhere out there, Lyra's people might be waiting, and Jake Morrison, a simple man who just wanted peace and quiet, had become part of something much larger than himself. He had become the protector of someone who had traveled across the stars only to need the help of a human stranger. In a remote mountain cabin, it was the beginning of an adventure that would change both their lives forever.